Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at Camp Impact Week 2, where we are talking all about event fundraising, innovating your strategy and your tech. And we have a jam-packed 90 minutes today. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder, today we've got a 30-minute workshop around community-centric fundraising events, getting in the right mindset and mind space for your events and rethinking your strategy and what you're going to be doing this fall and next year. After that, we'll move into a showcase of different nonprofit leaders talking about successful innovation that they've had in their events and the tools and technology they've used. So 2 really exciting parts of this today. And be sure and stick around for the whole thing. And there's tons to be learned from all the experts with us today. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Pond. And we're going to start off with this panel of incredible folks from the community-centric fundraising movement, and they'll tell you more about that. And we'll be focusing on how to make sure that your fundraising events specifically are staying community-centered. So I'd love to just start off by having our 3 speakers introduce themselves, and we'll get going from there. If you want to kick off, Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I am the Director of Development and Communications at a Toronto nonprofit, the Stop Community Food Center. I've been a nonprofit for about 10 years, specifically in fundraising. And my passion for it comes from my own personal lived experience. So I came to Canada as a refugee. I lived in a World Vision refugee shelter. I've used a lot of charitable services like food bank, drop-in meals, all those services that we work so hard to provide. And that's something that really drives my passion for what we do and for community-centric fundraising specifically. So thank you so much for attending.
Amazing. Marissa, do you want to go next?
Thanks, Mitch. I'm Marissa DeSalles, based in Sacramento, independent consultant working with mostly small nonprofits on community-centric fundraising. Really appreciate this conversation and the chance to hang out with some of my fellow community-centric fundraisers.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Hey everyone, my name is Michelle Fotis-Friend, pronouns she, her. During my 8 to 5 time, I'm the Chief Development Officer at the One Star Foundation, and I'm calling in today from Austin, Texas, and very pleased Mitch, to be in this convening of amazing CCF rock stars, and the movement's 2 years old. So I feel like the timing of this conversation is right on point.
Perfect. All right, well, I am excited to dig into this today. I think before we get into talking about how CCF relates specifically to events, for those that weren't able to attend the session we did in July with Michelle and Marissa talking about all things CCF, Marissa, if you could give us your 1-minute recap, which I realize is tough, a 1-minute recap of kind of what CCF is, what it stands for, and what the goals are of the movement.
Right, so as Michelle mentioned, community-centric fundraising, or CCF, is a 2-year-old movement that seeks to align the work that we do as fundraisers to raise funds towards good ends with the work that we are also doing as anti-racist human beings, right? So trying to find ways that we can inject our DEI principles into the work that we do in fundraising. And that means re-examining many of the structures we use, a lot of the communications tactics that we use, and rethinking our very framing when we're telling these stories of impact to funders, when we are trying to redirect resources from places of need to where they need to go.
Awesome. Well, super powerful work. As Michelle mentioned, y'all have been pushing this really forward for 2 years officially, but I know lots of people have been doing the work for many, many years. When we think about this in the context of events, where have you seen events and fundraising events for nonprofits sometimes go afoul of those core principles that CCF really rallies around? Maria, I'd love for you to kick that off.
Sure. So I think traditional forms of fundraising through events have been very elitist and exclusive by design. So like I mentioned, like I used to use food banks, drop-in meals, things like that. And where I work now, we had a huge donor-centric gala. So it's just a place where our community members would not feel safe, comfortable attending. And even if the ticket is donated, like you have to get your hair done, your makeup, things like that are inaccessible. So that's one problem with the way that we've done events. Not all stakeholders are comfortable. Oh, sorry.
Michelle, what are some things that you've seen in your past that you feel like were not fully aligned with the mission when you've been at a fundraising event?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, so from someone who, so I've been in development and communications, nonprofit development communications for almost 15 years. And so I've attended like my own fair share of galas and supporting friends and, their missions, and also been the person putting them on and like being the event planner. So I feel like I have a well-rounded view of this whole thing. And one thing that I feel like goes astray in most special events is you're so focused or hyper-focused on a fundraising goal, you're not really giving yourself enough time, particularly in the planning phases, of what are other things that are crucially important besides just meeting a fundraising metric, right? And so I think because we're so beholden to those financial goals, oftentimes we invest a lot of time and resources in events that have very little relationship building payoff.
Yeah, and I would also flag to everyone in the audience, feel free to jump in the chat, and if you've got questions, we'll definitely get to them in the end, if not throughout the conversation. So if you've got examples or things that you'd like to know about, definitely let us know. Marissa, I would love to hear how you feel like this has come to light even more, or these issues have come to light even more after 2 years of the pandemic that caused this massive disruption in how most events were run.
Right, we all had to throw all of our event planning tools out the window when the pandemic hit, right? So all of our conventional wisdom was completely garbage at that point, and we were forced to be creative, which I love, right? So I think the smartest orgs took that opportunity to say, listen, what we were doing was really not working that well anyway. Let's try something completely different. And I was chatting with Maria recently, and I was like, Maria, how did you do it? And she's like, I just told the board, events don't make money, first of all, right? We all know they're an incredibly heavy lift on staff that results in basically zero relationship building payoff. Presents a barrier to our communities to attend, to contribute, to feel part of our organization and not just a served person, right? I think that events in some ways represent all of the things that we can do wrong in fundraising. But I think that also is an opportunity to build an event with, I like the book, The Art of the Gathering. And in that she defines a phrase called generous authority. And it's when you're running an event and you are the ruler of the event. And that means that you can make some choices that enable, that include, right, that welcome, or you can make choices that exclude and separate. Right. And so in that planning process, I think is the really critical element where we don't just look at our metrics, we look at our overall goals, our relationship goals, our inclusion goals. Who is not at this event that should be and could be and wants to be, and how can we get them in here? And not just in here, but comfortable. How can we pair them with people that will make them feel like, oh, this is their event, they're hosting it, they're the VIPs, and the donors are the grateful recipients of this wonderful experience, right? Flip it all on its head. Let's do it completely differently. I think the pandemic gave us license to do that, and I feel like it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's a good exercise, even if not forced by the pandemic, but just to sit back and say, if we didn't know what we'd done last year or the decades before, and we had a completely blank slate, how would we approach events? And Michelle, if you were kind of advising someone who's doing this exercise and thinking about starting from a blank slate, what do you think are the most important questions to be asking, or what would you want to be thinking about in determining that new strategy?
Yeah, my response, I think, threads very nicely with what Marissa was saying, that as an organization, I think you need to look at the event as a piece of the larger whole of what you're doing. And when you look at that whole, you need to be asking questions like, what are my priority actions to accomplish, this year, maybe like the next 2 years? Is it that you really need to focus more on acquisition because that, that's your problem area? Is it that maybe you started new programs recently and a lot of people don't know about them? And so like educating about those programs is what your focus should be on. Marissa also said the inclusion piece, maybe seriously, related to your DEI efforts and your organization, inclusion is a big thing for you all and you're trying to get better at that. Maybe that's one of your goals. I think you're always going to have multiple goals, but the way I would approach it is literally splitting it through 100%. Okay, we know 70% of this event should be focused on our inclusion goals, maybe 30% educating about new programs or whatever the breakdown is, and then design an event that can really achieve those specific kinds of metrics. So I think, not to say the same thing over and over here, but we're so stuck on just the fundraising goal, which I'm not saying we should put that completely aside, but we've got to weave in other things that we're already trying to accomplish and leverage that event to do that.
Yeah, and Maria, I know that you're kind of in this process now with your own
Looks like Mitch froze. Oh, you're back.
Sorry about that. Maria, I know you were in this process yourself recently of taking into stock what you've done historically, and would love to hear kind of what you've been thinking and how you're reevaluating right now on the ground.
Yeah, so thankfully I have a really amazing team that's also really committed to community-centric fundraising. So we've been able to experiment with all the portfolios, from small gifts to planned giving to major gifts to events. With events, since we were making a quarter of our revenue from events a few years ago, it was kind of a harder conversation to convince stakeholders who don't do fundraising every day, who like attending the events and are engaged in that way. But with the pandemic, that gave us the opportunity to rethink how we engage our donors, how we engage our service users, and how they are portrayed as well. So in events, in our storytelling, just across the board. So we did an audit to kind of create a strategy based on how can we get as community-centric as possible. So right now we are not doing events. We're not doing anything like that. And we're still rethinking how we're going to approach that design of the event to be inclusive. So we're doing a lot of research. We're engaging with other nonprofits. We're growing partnerships just to see how people are doing it. We have been able to rely on some donors for that revenue gap. We more than made it up, which was really, really great, seeing the community come together and actually support us through that change in our fundraising methods. We've engaged a lot of our donors on these conversations. And we've been thinking about how to move donors who were really big supporters of events to be less transactional in their relationship with us. So for example, one of them was an event sponsor, and now they're really involved in our urban agriculture program. So they'll have a staff session where they donate $8,000 and they watch just one of our workshops that we do as part of our programming. So it's a really interesting way to think of re-engaging corporate partners. And CCF is something that I've been talking about with individuals and corporate partners this whole time, just so they are on the same track and we're actually really building that partnership. Is this CCF aligned? Is this feeding into the problematic things that nonprofits do, that donors do, that society does, or is this trying to be as least harmful as possible? I do acknowledge, and I do tell the donors, nonprofits are addressing systemic issues in a piecemeal way, but we can only do our best. And by moving away from elitist events or exclusionary events, that's a really good step. By moving away from transactional recognition, you're actually getting involved in the issues and you're being an advocate with, instead of just getting a tax receipt. getting a fancy dinner, right? We really want people to reimagine what their relationship with nonprofit can be, but also like what we're actually doing, like rethinking what is nonprofit for, who does it benefit, how can we actually have it benefit the people that we see want to benefit, right? So it's definitely been a long journey and we're still on that journey, but it's been really, really helpful to have team members who are very well versed on community-centric fundraising and who really champion it and, you know, hold me accountable in my language or in the strategy. And we've been able to have really good conversations with the board as well. So now the fundraising committee's term of reference includes community-centric fundraising. They definitely really understand why this is important and have been really supportive of the change. I know they still want to get back to events, so we'll see what that looks like in the future, but we've been brainstorming about different ways to engage. So like a movie night, a bingo night, like anything that's more accessible to people, but can make the money through sponsorships.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on so many important things, but for me, one of the overarching parts is that you're taking your time and engaging in those conversations and being really thorough instead of just jumping into something new, which I think is really, really powerful. And you also brought up a couple of these, what I would view as common problem areas where it's like navigating corporate sponsorships with an event or navigating board involvement with an event. I'd love to unpack those two things specifically a little bit. Michelle, if you've seen any best practices around corporate sponsorships that are more community centric, like how have you seen some good examples where people are doing this well and striking that balance at events?
Yeah, so two things come to mind immediately. One with the corporate sponsorships, and I'm doing this at future events that we're doing in our organization, but also know other people are doing this as well with corporate sponsorships. When you have, in my case, it'd be like large conferences, but you know, there's corporate sponsorships for other types of events. But as a leading sponsor, you often get, of course, like that speaking time in front of everyone in the room, and you're up there talking about, you know, whatever it is that the corporate sponsor wants to talk about. And now in my corporate sponsorship packages, I always make it very clear that for any speaking opportunities that I really want conversation around why is that corporation sponsoring this mission, this event, right? And usually the answer to that is always like corporate values aligned with the nonprofit work. And that's great. Like, it's kind of like, well, duh, like that's why you'd be sponsoring it. But I want like to pull on that thread more, like, let's hear more about your core values as a company and how it fits with what we're doing, and really like make that more of a centerpiece and center stage moment than just something that could go off the rails into different directions. So that's like in the corporate sponsorship package of like, you know, talking about why this event means something to you and your business values. And Mitch, like as a business owner, I'm sure like you'll agree that corporations and companies want this time too, like to link those threads together between why this mission is important to them. So that's, you know, kind of a easier one to implement. One thing too I've seen with some galas is the like pay what you can priced ticket model. And there was one event, I think they're actually not holding it this year still because of COVID, but there's an organization in Vermont called Outright Vermont, which is an LGBTQ plus youth organization. And I know they implemented this a couple of years ago. I'm gonna put this in the chat in case you want to look at them further. They implemented this a couple of years ago. And you know, obviously if you can pay what you can, it opens it up to people who really want to be a part of that event that normally wouldn't be able to attend, and now they can. So, you know, that's something to also consider as well. And I think for a lot of people who are able to afford those higher ticket prices, you know, they'll like just test it and see, are they still going to pay what they could pay? Maybe they would pay even more. But that was one thing I saw and just had to share with everyone.
Yeah, I love that. And like you said, that could be another opportunity for a sponsor to be sponsoring the discounted or pay as you will ticket prices. That's very mission aligned too. Marissa, any examples there on the corporate sponsorship side or board engagement with events that you found to be more community centric?
Well, I was thinking just about like, not specifically on those ends, but thinking about the volunteer element of events and some of the back end processes of events, and considering those as opportunities in a different way. We typically approach those with, we have a task list, we need some folks to, stand at the door, do the stupid task, whatever, right? As opposed to, is this a space where we could elevate a regular volunteer into a position of temporary authority, right? That deepens their engagement with our organization and changes their relationship with the organization, right? So trying to look into some of the weeds and cracks and find in those some opportunities to really utilize these events. There was a point in the chat about, events are acquisition opportunities, right? You in addition to the, known donors you're bringing, they're bringing their friends and their coworkers and stuff. And these are not only potential donors to the organization, they're potential board members, they're potential staff members, they're potential volunteers, right? Every human being that is a new acquisition to your org is a win. And rethinking the metric around that and trying to be intentional around some of that back end work, not, looking at it more than just a task, but as an opportunity for inclusion and engagement and pulling people into deeper levels of engagement. I could talk to Maria all day. There's so much more that she has to share, you guys. But one of the things that really excited me about what her org has been practicing is that they're leading with the relationship. Right? Like that's right. That's why it feels so authentic. It's because the first thing she says is we talked to our partners, right? Not we made a top-down decision based on our little internal thing. We talked to our people and said, hey, this is what's really going on. Here's where we really need your help. We know that you like this. We need that. Let's talk about what's in the middle. And do you think any of those sponsors walked away? I don't think so. I feel like if anything, they felt compelled to lean in closer, right? Now I'm really a valued part of this organization. I'm not just a paycheck, right? So that's the thing that keeps coming back to me and really sticking with me through this whole conversation.
Yeah, and Maria, there was a question that came up in the chat earlier that it sounds in line with what Marissa was just describing, is some folks have trouble with those conversations, especially if they're making sure their board or leadership is understanding the CCF priorities and committed to balancing those with fundraising or incorporating that with their fundraising. What have you found to be most successful when you're having an initial conversation with someone, bringing them on board and moving the organization forward?
Yeah, so the hardest conversations were, of course, with the board. With donors, it's a little bit easier to bring them along because they understand that they don't know everything, right? So it's like, this is how we're moving towards equity. This is a newer movement. So I get that you don't get it, but let's just talk about it, right? And they are so willing to listen and everything. With the board, the approach that I took was, let's look at the return on investment, right? So the events, our highest like return on investment on the events was $4.5 to $1 that we've invested. That's not bad. But like when you invest that into other types of relationship building, it can go so much further, right? So just talking about the numbers was really helpful. And then talking about, okay, well, we do have a lot of people come to the events. Who makes a gift after? Only 20% of those people were making a gift after. So obviously this isn't an opportunity that we're capitalizing on to really build those relationships. And then in addition to that, it's who is excluded when the ticket price is $400, $150, like a lot of people who are part of our community, the people that we do this work for, wouldn't be able to attend. Like $100 is what I was spending on a month's groceries, like granted like 10 years ago, but still it's a lot of money, right? So yeah, so just really engaging people in like personal aspect of it, like asking them to really think like, what are we doing? What is the purpose of this? Like, is this just, for event chairs to feel good and rub shoulders with some friends or colleagues? that's not what I'm interested in. And just, I'm very happy to speak my mind and just really question why we're doing things a certain way, and who that benefits. So with donors, it's been much easier. With board members, I think I have a lot more buy-in now than I did a year ago, because people really understand why this is important. But there is that, that thinking that if you do things CCF aligned, you're not going to make any money. And that's just not the case. So now that I've had a full year and a half of doing CCF aligned actions, and I'm making more money than we were before, like, there's, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like, this does work. This does engage people in a meaningful way. Actually, we've been able to engage some of our donors to give like $25,000 to a different organization chosen by our community members. So like, we're doing a lot of really good things when it comes to fundraising, and trying to just move to as least harmful as possible. So yeah.
Awesome. And I know there's been some good conversation in the chat, Michelle, but would you mind expanding a bit on what you were saying about, such a great point is the burnout, the lift that goes into events, especially if you're trying something new nowadays, or going hybrid, going virtual, going back to in person. So many changes are really draining for people. What do you think is the best way to make sure you're taking care of your teams after events?
Yeah, I think it starts like in the planning phases, is you can't, as leadership in particular, this is like for the leaders out there, you can't talk about events like they're over when it's the actual event stops, because they're not over. And the way, if we model that kind of thinking, people will think, okay, well, we're done. Like, let's, like we got the auction items, let's go home. And but for development staff and other people in the chat, I think including kind of making the weight being carried by other areas besides just development staff is key. And I mean, that's helpful to burnout, but also just making sure that, like I was saying in the chat, I put time, like usually it's at least like 5 days to do like the relationship follow-up, because that's time sensitive follow-up. Like, you can't just do that 3 months after the event and expect the impact to be the same. So I block my calendar for those activities way before like the event even starts. And I think it's also important to block real vacation after that relationship follow-up is done.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, like you said, we're trying new things. I mean, even this session today, and right after this, we're going to be hearing from people that tried out new technologies or use new platforms. Marissa, when you've seen that happen, do you have any advice for people that are trying out something new or innovating, especially as they try to do something hybrid or virtual, or bringing in more tech to the experience? Do you have any advice to make sure people are either not getting overwhelmed by it, or that it's being received well by the team, by the community? What's the best way to change manage when you're innovating your events?
Well, this may not be the sexiest answer, Mitch, and I apologize, but putting on my like CRM and development and nerd hat for a second, I would say documentation. If you remember, because events are a whirlwind and we're doing 50,000 things at once, it is impossible to remember what you did later. And so, as I say to like people building systems, document your processes, document what you've changed, because it just makes your life easier later when you're trying to go back and analyze, okay, did this actually work? What happened? And I don't mean just on the technical end, I mean also on like the human end of things, right? If you sent a staff member home crying at the gala, you may want to make yourself a note, right? Make sure and follow up with that. No, I'm kidding, but truly, I'm being intentional about our processes and then documenting our successes and our challenges on the human end, as well as all those other important metrics, because at the end of the day, none of the other metrics matter if you burned out all the humans on your staff.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what Michelle was sharing very early on around like setting those goals and establishing them before you get started. And to your point, making sure you're tracking and keeping note of, how you changed, what your goals were, did you meet them, so that you can continue to evolve, because it's never just a one-time change. So I think it's really, really good advice. Well, I knew that 30 minutes would go by super fast, but I really appreciate all that you three shared with us and all of your experience that you bring to bear. This is just really great framing and mindset for people to keep in mind as we jump into some of these stories now in our showcase from folks about what they tried out at their events and what worked and what they were most excited about. So thank you to Maria, Michelle, and Marissa for spending some time with us. We're going to transition over to the showcase part, and we'll hear from 5 different nonprofit leaders talking about what they innovated at their events and what worked and the strategies and tools that they use. Just a reminder to everybody that we will be gathering your feedback after each of those 10-minute segments. So you're going to get a lot of insight. We'd love to hear what's helpful to you and what you're thinking about actioning. So we will direct you after each person shares. You can click the 3 little dots at the bottom of your screen, and that'll link you straight to the feedback form. Really helpful if you could let us know your thoughts. And 5 of the participants today will also get $100 credit on Pond for filling out those feedback forms. So we will take about 60 seconds in between each person sharing to gather that feedback. So really appreciate everyone sharing with us. Now we're going to transition into the showcase and get started here with our first speaker in just 1 minute. And like I said, we're going to be hearing about what their problems were that they were facing in their events, how they addressed them with new technology, and the strategies that they implemented to be able to make those successful. Because it's never just the tool, it's a lot of people management and process management along the way too. Just give us 1 minute, we will get started with that. And our first speaker is going to be Andrea Tawney. We would love to hear from you, Andrea, if you could just share a little bit on, hey, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. Would love for you to kick us off before we get into the tools and stuff to use. We'd just love to hear a little bit about you, your organization, and what you all do.
Yeah, so I'm vice president here at Texas Tech Center El Paso, and I oversee, I have the joy and privilege because I get to oversee both marketing, communications, and fundraising, which really includes grant writing, anything private, corporate funder and foundation funder runs through our team. We have a team of about 30, so we're a little bit bigger of a shop in that way, but we're smaller than a lot of university advancement teams. And I've been in this job for 14 years, but have been in higher ed for almost about 18 years now. 18 years. That dates me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining. We'd love to jump in to just hear a little bit. You're going to share about how you use Donor Charm in your events, but we'd love to hear kind of before you found that tool or started using it, what were some of the biggest challenges that you saw or faced in the events that you would run for fundraising?
Sure. So one of our biggest challenges was really engaging people to participate in giving at the event and being compelled to give at the event. Of course, as you can imagine, over 18 years, I've not only led a variety of nonprofit efforts, but served on board as a volunteer on boards and been to many, fundraising, as many of us have. And, the auctions, the live auctions, the silent auctions, the putting the cards on the tables, it really has evolved so much and is so challenging. And I find it to be almost a little bit intrusive, some of the live auctions. And so I really never really wanted to do that when I stepped into this role. And so I'd seen a variety of different text to give platforms and things like that have evolved over the years. But when I came across this Donor Charm, this text to give, it was so slick, and the way it was used at another nonprofit gala was really impressive. And so, again, just really making it about those who are at a table who maybe got invited, who didn't pay anything to get to the event, but feel compelled to give because they're connected to the cause. And that's really what we were trying to invoke at our events, and them to give on the spot, but not in the theory of like an auction or a transactional activity.
Awesome. And do you mind sharing a little bit about how you set it up or what you used it for, and just kind of share with people exactly how Donor Charm worked at your event?
Yes, so it was, I will say, we really tried to, that we've had 2 events so far, both anniversary events, one for our School of Medicine and then one for our School of Nursing. The one for School of Medicine was February 2020, right before the world shut down. And then the last one was just this past May. And so all of our fundraising around the event, leading up to the event, was around scholarships for our students. So all of our marketing pieces, all of our storytelling ahead of time and at the event was all focused on students and the need for scholarships in our community for our future, healthcare heroes. So what we did at the first time around is we made it a table challenge. And that got incredibly competitive. So I will say that again, this is not for everybody. It may not be an all-inclusive approach because, people, organizations or corporate entities or donors have already paid, for a table to be there or a sponsorship. So, that's a pretty high dollar amount. But then, 8 other people oftentimes have not contributed to the cause at all. So we felt pretty good about trying to engage tables in this challenge. And so we had a lot of graphics, we had a lot of components that we showed on the screen and made sure that all our screens were very visible. And then we had an MC who really had to prep her to make sure she was engaged and understood the flow of this. And really demonstrate the milestones throughout. So the other thing is we lined up a matching donor. If we hit a certain amount that night, we had a matching donor lined up to kick in if we reached that amount. So a little bit of the psychology of donors in the room to kind of get them to a threshold for that match to kick in. So we did it as a challenge between tables, and we would show the table leaderboard on screen and made it a really fun interactive competition. I've seen the event I attended when I first saw this platform was they would give some different prizes and things like that they had donated to them for some of the competitors and just different fun things. We were not really wanting to do that. So the only thing we did was the winner of the table who had raised the most amount of money that night got to wear a cool Texas Tech floppy hat and got their picture on social media, and people loved that. They loved that floppy hat more than anything. But it was really about the competition, and I was quite shocked because it really drew on that psyche of like sort of the in the moment auction fundraising that we wanted to get away from, but still drew on that psychological piece of what goes into the frenzy of an auction because of the competition amongst the tables. So that's really how we based it, and it was a text to give platform from their phones.
Awesome. I know you mentioned it was big with acquiring new donors and engaging other people at the event. Did you see a marked difference after you started using that approach?
Yes. So the dollars raised were huge for us. On the first event, we raised in the event on the platform $64,000 that was without matching money. And then the second event, this past May, we raised about that as well, about $65,000 again that was without the matching funds. So the dollar amount was, and collectively ended up being pretty high for us. I mean, that's a huge amount to raise at an event, at least in all my years of experience, which was all net to scholarships. And so the biggest thing, though, that was super exciting is that we had acquired so many new donors in the community, everything from a new, $50 donor all the way up to maybe $5,000, $1,000 donor. So it was the spectrum of acquiring new, even annual, annual giving type of donors. That was our real success because it gave us an opportunity to put them in our system, which is also sort of unique on this platform, is that we're able to transfer all of that data into our current database, and then we're able to steward the donors. We've all been to a lot of events where we do an auction or we give, and then there's no follow-up. There's not even, they don't collect your data. So there's not a way for them to even thank you and keep you engaged and add you to your newsletters and invites and things like that. So that combined with the, outside from the dollar amount raised was huge for us.
Awesome. Well, last question is, aside from this platform specifically, but what would just your biggest advice be to folks that are running fundraising events? Your number one takeaway that you'd share with people?
Oh my gosh. Well, one, I'm a little biased because I'm not a fan of events. I think you heard everybody on the earlier call say how it burns out your team and we're not a fan of it. So if you absolutely have to do an event, I'll put that disclosure because I'm not a fan myself either. They're resource intensive. I would just say plan early and, have someone who's going to run the lead on all of the details. And really think about what your revenue is going to be, because at the end of the day, I hear a lot of nonprofits, and I totally get it, where they say, we got to do this for visibility, or we got to stay relevant out there. There's so many other ways to stay relevant. So for me, the true fundraiser in me is always, how much are we going to raise from this? Because I could think of 100 other ways to not burn out my team and stay relevant and to raise visibility for my mission, rather than this huge event that we have to put on for 800 people. So really think about that, because our revenue, and we really make it sort of a year initiative. So I would just, those are my key takeaways. Think about your revenue, what's your return outside of sort of what really is your monetary revenue that you're raising for your cause and your mission, and then have just someone who's going to run the lead on all of your details, because it is just so much. As we all know, it's just such a heavy lift if you have to do an event.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with us, and congrats on the success and being able to implement such a cool piece of tech at your events. And it's really exciting to hear about. So I appreciate you sharing, Andrea. Thank you, everybody. And next up, we have Brianna from Little Lighthouse. And Brianna, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to just start off by having you share a little bit about your organization and your role.
Yeah, so I have been with Little Lighthouse for 3 years. This was my first job, kind of coming back from motherhood and being home with my kids for a while. But we are a Christian development center for children with special needs from birth to age 6. And we do that completely tuition free. So all of our fundraising is very important for our organization. We're known as providing some of the most highly individualized special education and early intervention services in our area. And we have a transdisciplinary team that works to assist each of our students individually in achieving their potential. And we hold about 4 major fundraisers every year. So lots of fundraising.
Yeah, so you're resonating with all the things we've been discussing so far. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, before you're here to share a bit about how you use GiveEffect, but what were some of your biggest challenges with those events before you moved to the platform?
So I would say we had several systems prior to moving to GiveEffect. And none of them were like a great 100% fit, which in my opinion, there's nothing that's ever going to be 100% fit for any organization, but there were a lot of issues with the ones we had tried. Training staff was a huge issue, making sure that it was user-friendly for our staff who's not, not all of them are incredibly tech savvy. Not all of them, have a degree in operating systems or anything like that. So one of the issues that we really ran into was that we had all these multiple integrations into the system we had. And when they worked, it was great. But when they didn't work, as we all know, that can be a real headache. And it caused a lot of duplication of contacts. It caused extra work for the staff that we already had. And so we were really trying to find something that would allow us to move more digital and technologically advanced, but so many of our systems were on paper still because people just didn't know how to use the system or didn't trust the system. And that was a huge obstacle.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about, how you decided on GiveEffect and kind of how you successfully implemented it.
Yeah, so back in about 2018 is when we started looking for something. We really wanted something that would capture our peer-to-peer fundraising. and our volunteer system, and then allow us access to the information on our donors and our families. And Give Effect is kind of this one-stop shop for us that has been really great. It has allowed us to really pull in all of our donor systems into one place. We can run emails through the system. We can run all of our campaign pages for our fundraisers through the system. And there's so many different options when it comes to fundraising there that it has, and we've used all of them, but there's peer-to-peer fundraising, regular fundraising page. You can do RSVP events and ticketed events, and then auctions as an add-on for any of those. So it's been a really great way for us, especially post-pandemic, to kind of branch out a little bit in what we were able to offer from before.
Awesome. And can you share a little bit about how you make the most of it with your events specifically? I know you mentioned that's a big thing that you have kind of year round.
Yeah, so one of our biggest events is we do about an 800-person gala called Garden Party every spring. It's mostly for our donors. I think we're all familiar with that type of setup. But we have a silent auction and a live auction that we run as a part of that fundraiser. And one of the things we were running into is we were using paper bid forms for 200 plus silent and live auction items, trying to run items out to people, making sure all those donations then were taken on one payment system. They had to get entered into our main CRM, and it was a real headache. So when we moved to Give Effect, it gave us the ability to put all of that kind of in one place. So we can process payments, we can run our auction, we can send out email receipts and all of those things in one central location that really helps kind of split that work over multiple people. And one of the things that we've seen as a function of that is we've seen growth in all 4 of our major fundraisers. So we've had 73% growth since implementation of Give Effect. That's over 4 years. In our Garden Party, we had 54% growth in our 5K and fun run, 35% growth in our peer-to-peer fundraising event that we do with our families, and then 18% growth in our golf event. And one of probably the most significant thing we saw was when we decided to pivot in 2020. We had about 4 weeks to switch our main gala to an online function. And when we did that, we saw, sorry, trying to find my statistics. We saw a 73% increase just that 1 year. And then we actually have seen a 687% increase in our auction revenues since we've shifted them to online or hybrid situation, because we're able to reach out and reach so many additional people. I think, like they were saying in the session, it's just, you have to look at that. It's not just about how much more money we bring in, but we're also reaching all of those people with what our organization provides and what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned one of the big challenges before was people's reluctance to use the systems or discomfort. So how do you, what was your strategy to make sure people were, able to change manage effectively and make the most out of the new system?
Yeah, so my 2 main goals when I came on was to increase people's comfortability, how comfortable people were with the system, and then increase the breadth of the solutions we were able to access and Give Effect. And one of the ways I did that was, which I think it's not second nature, but it maybe is something we have to work on in nonprofit, because I think we take so much on ourselves and we're just like, okay, I can do that. I can do that. But when people would reach out to me and say, I need this pulled, or I don't know how to do this, then I would really have to set aside that time and say, okay, let me come show you how to do it. Or let me, I would develop a lot of training documents that say, this is how, and walk people through, because I think it's really important for people to feel comfortable with whatever system you're using. And Give Effect happens to be in my opinion, very user-friendly to people who are intimidated by the idea of a big system.
Yeah, well, good on you for being so thoughtful and diligent with your team. I'm sure that made a huge difference. And my last question would just be, what's your number one event advice for folks out there that are running events? As we know, there's many here on the call with us today.
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest thing that has made our events successful is embracing our mission. And I think that's so important to know your goal and what you ultimately want to achieve for your organization, because if you can bring that kind of fire and passion for your organization and show that to your donors, then I think it's really easy to help kind of pull them in more. And so you're getting them to come alongside you as part of the mission instead of just kind of throwing money at it. And one of the things that we do is we try and bring our students and families into every event we do. So even if it's our golf event, we have families come out with their students and they drive around in the golf carts and they say hi to all the golfers. Or we interviewed them at our gala, a group of our students. And, it's unpredictable and you don't know what you're going to get, but it's a great way for our donors to really connect with our goal and our mission.
Yeah, well, it's awesome that you're just like the session we started off with today, keeping that mission centered and mission aligned and able to use this great technology to help with that. So appreciate you sharing that story, Brianna, and appreciate you all the great work you're doing out there. It sounds really exciting what you guys are building. So appreciate it. All right, we'll move to our next session here with Nina, and we'll get going here in just a second. Nina, thanks so much for joining us today. Excited to hear more about your story and would love for you to just kick us off by introducing yourself, your role, and a little bit about your organization.
Great. Yeah, I'm Nina Rungish. I'm the Director of Fund Development here at Outlook in Richmond. We are a nonprofit in Omaha, Nebraska that works with the visually impaired. So we do anything from recreational activities to adaptive technology training, independent living, employment training, support group, arts and cultural, and we teach Braille.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to start off by just having you share a bit, before you move to golf status, which we'll hear more about. Just share with us a few of your biggest challenges or hurdles you had around your fundraising event strategy beforehand.
Okay, so I joined in 2021 in November. But prior to that, they had used several different platforms and they were not user friendly. People had issues registering. If we had issues with credit cards, we always had to rent a credit card machine. We were getting stuck with thousands of dollars in credit card fees because there wasn't a way for us to see if the person that was registering or donating wanted to carry on those fees for us. And then balancing after the event, we had to do it all at the end of the event. That's when all the money came in at one time, and it just took months to balance everything and pull everything over into another system that we use to track all of our donors.
Well, a lot of payment friction feels not like the most productive thing for your team to be working on. Can you tell us a little bit about the event that you use Golf Status for and how you use the platform?
So we use them. We do a annual blind golfers clinic, and after that we do our tournament every year in June. And I was researching new ways to get people to register and hopefully reach new audiences. And I ran across Golf Status and just the ease of being able to put all of our information out there, the ease of registration, the fact that I could balance every week, knowing if I had money coming in every week, I could send a report to my accounting team. We were balancing, we were getting thank you notes sent out in a timely manner as soon as within days of them registering, because we got an email every time somebody registered. Our sponsors were able to pay for their golf and get a sponsorship all in one-stop shop. And we actually now are going to be using them. We have another event coming up on September 10th. It's a social event. So we're running everything through that at Golf Status as well. So it's nice that it can be used for multiple things. We knew how to do the setup, and we already have our golf ready to go for next year with them.
Amazing. And what do you feel like has been your biggest achievement from moving to a more seamless digital experience for attendees or for the team?
It's saving us so much time because we are able, because I'm a one-person shop basically. So I do getting it all set up, do all the back end, making sure everything's entered into the system after somebody registers, making sure the funds are balancing. So it's just me. So it has saved me so much time because I came at the end of an event last year, and it took me 2 months to after the event to get everything finalized and know that we had everything. With Golf Status, I was able, the week after the event, I had a meeting and I was able to tell people, this is how much money we've raised. We're done. Everything's in. And I was able, thank you notes were sent. So it's just such a time saver. And the fact that we already know the next year's golf date after our event, so we can promote it. We've already got golf ready to go for next year. So if people want to start registering, they can. Otherwise, anybody looking for a tournament will already see that we've got one coming up.
And why, what do you find most effective about a golf outing as the fundraising event for your organization? Like, I guess for others that are contemplating different types of fundraisers, why do you find that it works well for you all?
It works well because we've been doing, so we are on our, so Outlook in Richmond emerged 3 years ago through Outlook Nebraska, but Outlook Nebraska has been doing the golf tournament since 2004. And every year it gets bigger and bigger. And we love that. It's just something that it's a fun way for people to connect. They enjoy the challenge of the event. And some people, we're not a traditional sit down, do the normal gala dress up, because we want anybody to come. And when you're working with consumers and employees who a lot live below the poverty level, they can't afford to come to a gala. But they know when they come out to the golf course, our employees and some of our consumers are out there at the challenge holes telling their stories. And our golfers really love that because they say it gives them a little bit of a break from golfing, but it shows them what their money that day is going for and who it's helping.
Awesome. And when you were implementing the new platform, I guess, what do you feel like made it most successful, that you either the strategy that you took on or how you worked with the team on it?
I think what made the event most successful in switching over was how easy Golf Status is to work with. When we've worked with other platforms, you're emailing somebody, but you don't know who you're emailing. You don't know this person. They don't live local. With Golf Status for us, they're local. So, and they get back to you right away. And even if somebody had a question while registering, when they go into the chat function, they're going to talk to somebody that actually knows about my event, that knows me and our organization as a whole. And that's what we loved about Golf Status. They actually took the time when we were talking to them about moving to this platform to ask us about our organization, what we were looking to get out of this, and who we were. So they knew who we are. And they understood the type of people that are going to be registering for our events could be visually impaired. And so they have taken the time to help to talk to us, meet with us to understand what they could do to make their site more accessible for those who are living with a vision impairment. And we've never gotten that from anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great example of this topic we've been covering all day about mission alignment and how your event and your technology and all of that can be aligned, which is really great. My last question would just be more generally, especially for folks that are in one-person development shops like yourself, like what's your number one piece of advice around running fundraising events?
Making sure you get plenty of volunteers, delegating, setting up committees. I've got a raffle committee for my golf event and a planning committee starting early. So my next event is September 10th. We're going to start planning for golf in October of this year. So it's just setting aside, getting everything ready, and just leaning on your volunteers and your staff. If you have volunteers in your organization, lean on them, use them as much as possible. And I know one thing that I've done that is go to your local chambers, talk to the people that belong to your local chambers, because a lot of times you're going to find some good volunteers and people that want to help.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Nina, for sharing all this with us and for all the work you're putting in on these events and moving things forward. So really appreciate you sharing. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing that with us. And our next speaker is Callie. Would love to kick off, Callie, by just having you introduce yourself, a little bit about your role and the organization that you're working with.
Yeah, so I am the development director for All Heart Infusion. I take care of all fundraising from grants to events and everything in between. I also run all of the online marketing. All Heart Infusion is a nonprofit nursing organization. So all of our nurses specialize in infusion nursing, which is anything intravenous, peripheral IV, central lines, things like that. And we provide all of our care at no cost to the patients.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know we're going to hear about your experience finding and using ZGive, but we'd love to hear kind of before that, some of your biggest struggles or frustrations you encountered around your fundraising events.
Yeah, so we have a wide age range of donors. I would say about 40% are millennials, 40% are Gen X, and then we have that 20% that are baby boomers. And I have donors who don't even have smartphones, don't have an email account, completely no technology at all. So getting them to utilize technology to make events more seamless has been our challenge, and finding one that was easy for them to use while also catering to people who know a little bit more about it.
Right. Yeah. Catering to that wide spectrum can definitely be a big challenge, making sure everyone feels included and then it's accessible for all of them. So share a little bit about how you decided to use ZGive and what you use it for.
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we were paper bid sheets. We didn't use any real tech at all, swiping credit cards, that sort of a deal. Then when we did do our virtual fundraiser in 2020, we kind of didn't know even what we were looking for. So we just picked one at random, and it really didn't work for us. They didn't have a lot of customer service. We had some issues come up, and it took 4 or 5 days to get a response when we were in the middle of a live event. And so that was a bit of a challenge. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna look at everything. I'm gonna figure this out. So I did demos with a bunch of different organizations, and when ZGive came around, it was just so personable. They felt more like a partner than, a company that we were paying to work with us. And it just was so easy to use that made it a really easy decision.
Awesome. And what did you find was your biggest achievement once you moved off of the paper bids to the fully online auction?
So this year when we did our fundraiser, everybody was using a smartphone, or for some of those baby boomers, an iPad I provided to them. And we actually showed the back end of the auction. We projected it on a screen so everybody could see all of the bids and everything that happened. And we were doing our dessert auction, and we had cake selling for $500.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing.
That is awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about how you made sure it was successful? I know, like you said, you're catering to this wide audience. So what were some of your own tactics or strategies to make sure that the rollout went well and the event was successful with the new tool?
Yeah, something I had to start doing was actually, beyond creating an event budget and And I had to start creating a time budget for myself because we needed to make sure that the event was actually going to make money. And I think that's somewhere where a lot of people forget that your time is also value added. And so you have to look at how much time are you putting in, and once you factor that in, are you still making money on the event? And so looking at their fees and then the time that was being put in, was it going to be successful no matter what? And the answer was yes.
Wow, that's really cool. So you came up with a way of measuring and kind of calculating return on your own time investment. Is that something that does your team do that now as well for other things? It seems like a really cool system.
Well, I'm kind of it's really just a one-person team, and then I have volunteers. So it's really just managing my own time and input and looking at how much time is going into it versus the event budget and how much money have we made in the past. So when we calculate our total, that's included in how much money is made on the event.
Very cool. And when you mentioned all the volunteers that you're working with, is there anything special that you did for them to make sure they were comfortable with the system, or making sure that they were engaged and leveraging it as well?
Yeah, so our volunteers, we've got everybody on Google Meet, and we walked through a quick demo, and it was so easy to use that they all picked it up right away, and they had an event login, so they were able to walk around and help people get it figured out.
And I know you mentioned some of the excitement kind of building up at the event around even a cake auction. What did you find worked well that built that excitement, that created the energy in the room?
I think honestly, it was being able to show the back end. So they were seeing what we were seeing. Each bid that came in, every donation that was made, it didn't show anybody's personal information beyond their name. And so when you're watching it and you're competing with somebody and you can see those numbers going up, it just there were table competitions happening, and people were, we had a daughter and father fighting over a cake that their mom had made. And they were all at the same table. So it's just being able to see it, I think, was the biggest impact.
I love that. And I love that like you said, the name being hidden gets some of that personal piece out of it. So you can really just be focusing on the, kind of the event and the excitement, like you said, and keeping that mission aligned. And how do you think about auctions as a part of your fundraising strategy? Like if someone is thinking about, running a new fundraiser and trying to decide if an auction is right for them or not, what would your advice be?
Well, it takes a lot of time, and you're going to hear no a lot. So account for that. Don't take no as a final answer, because it's never a final answer. But also just understand that putting together an auction can take months. And so if you're going to commit to that, then just be prepared for that and be very organized.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense. And I guess more generally, I know that you do all kinds of fundraising, and I'm sure you've seen lots of events, but what would your number one piece of advice be to anyone on the call today that has a big event upcoming, maybe this fall? What would your number one piece of advice be?
When you're planning an event, we like to plan the actual timing of the event like a story. So we create an arc of the event and plot out exactly how much time are you going to allot for everything, and then have a cushion in there.
Awesome, Callie. Well, thank you so much for sharing and for all your success and moving this to a fully digital event. It must be a huge weight off your shoulders. Better for the environment, less wasted paper, and clearly big progress at your organization. So really appreciate you sharing today and joining us.
Thank you.
All right. We will get going here with our final speaker. So thank you so much for joining us, Antonia. Would love to have you kick us off by just introducing yourself and your role, and tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Antonia Ovendele. I'm the founder and executive director of Ethos Lab Educational Society, based here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And we exist to empower youth to transform community and shift culture. And we do this by providing access to science, technology, engineering, art, and math in culturally relevant ways. I am a parent to an amazing 15-year-old that really inspired this vision. And we are 2 years in operation. And so we're a newer organization relative to the other speakers, but really excited to be here to talk about our experiences with Active Replica. Oh.
Like you said, relatively new organization, but when you were getting started, what were some of your biggest challenges or things that you were hoping to solve that you ultimately used Active Replica for?
Yeah, we launched our organization on February 28th, 2020. 2 weeks, 2 weeks before the whole world shut down. And so we really needed to find a way to pivot into a virtual space in a way that was meaningful for participants that were starting to get engaged. And so Active Replica was there to be able to work with the young people and our organization to create a virtual experience to not only begin to grow our membership, but also to really build in the area that we wanted to be in, which is an emerging technology. So it was always part of the roadmap. It's just that we had to do it first versus building in person. And so that was the opportunity that we had there. So while it was a challenge, it was actually an opportunity for us to really show everyone what the future looked like.
Yeah, and just because I think Active Replica is a unique product and some people might not be super familiar with virtual reality. So I'd love for you to share a bit about like how you found it and what you wanted to be able to use it for.
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit, we actually ran a hackathon with the young people to say, what is it like how did they want to interact virtually? And they did a hackathon, and what came up were a whole bunch of virtual worlds as their vision. And as an organization, the challenge was like, how do we go about then building these virtual worlds? And what Active Replica does is they leverage the open source Hubs by Mozilla platform, and they create customized virtual spaces. And so the outcome was the development of Atlanthos, an underwater basketball arena, where the kids are able to gather, play, create, and celebrate. And so that we co-created that with Active Replica.
And so how do people leverage the virtual space? Like if folks aren't super familiar with using it, how did you get people engaged and started?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if you're maybe speaking to someone over the age of 30, getting them engaged with the virtual space might be a bit more of an uphill battle. But when you're talking to the teens, which is our demographic between 12 and 18, it's kind of like asking, a fish about water, it's just, that's where they exist. So it wasn't too hard to get the young people engaged in this space. However, as a concept, again, and being in emerging technologies and the type of programming we wanted to deliver, there was definitely a challenge in being able to communicate what the possibilities were. And as such, also when in the context of fundraising, being able to explain to fundraisers what the opportunity was a huge challenge. And so being able to then create this platform, create this space, it allowed people to step into the future in a way where, okay, we can invest in these young people, but we're also investing in creating a more inclusive digital reality.
Yeah, and what have you felt like your biggest achievement has been since you started using the virtual space you created with Active Replica?
Yeah, I think there are kind of two things. One is from a learning perspective. These young people are world builders. They're building in Blender. They're also they're able to create 3D assets. They're able to navigate, facilitate, again, in virtual spaces, which is one of the bigger challenges that I think in emerging emerging technology is facing. So we're definitely equipping these young people to be leaders of the future. But the other side of it, I'd say the biggest achievement is again our ability to shift the conversation around what inclusion looks like within these spaces. As a Black-led organization, we really do focus on again increasing representation in this space. So I'd say one of our achievements is being able to see a diverse set of young people feeling empowered to be able to create in this space. And that has translated to the diversity of the fundraisers, the funders that we've been able to engage.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, again, such a great example of how you brought your mission into your fundraising event of, inclusivity being at your core. Can you talk a little bit about how what strategies you took in building and using the tool to make sure it achieved those goals?
Yeah, I think we put it right at the forefront, and we also give the young people the space for critical thought in terms of the development of their assets. So when I talk about co-creation and what Active Replica as an organization did with us, oftentimes these spaces or young people exist in these spaces that are kind of created for them. The assets are given to them, but to be able to see themselves in the space, whether it be the art that they've produced, whether it be also providing feedback to Active Replica on their inclusion and accessibility, feedback on these types of spaces, I think has really aligned with what we're trying to do. So it was always at the core of what we were trying to achieve.
Love that. And what, from the fundraising front specifically, because it's really cool how you've been able to marry the program, like the core program, as a fundraising vehicle as well. Can you share a little bit about how you think about using virtual reality for fundraising?
Yeah, I think, we've been talking a lot about, again, different virtual events and such. So we've really leveraged web VR. So again, you don't necessarily need a VR headset, but you can if you want to in terms of participating. It does create a more immersive experience. But that being said, it allowed for a lot of people to gather from many different parts or regions to be able to learn more about our organization and also experience what we're trying to do, which when you're talking about, again, emerging technologies, it is very hard to communicate that, again, especially to traditional donors. And so for them to be able to kind of click a button and enter into this space, we were able to leverage it in that way. And so, you're able to, we were able to create a two-day festival for a two-room festival for kids, and there were 3 stages, and they were able to go and, for some of these kids that again are 13, 14, it's the first time they're able to see or be a part of that and really feel like they're engaged in that space. So there's a lot of opportunity in leveraging virtual spaces, especially customized ones that tell your story, reflect your community, to then allow for funders to again see the value in giving funds into newer spaces. So it also did position us amongst kind of a Web3 community and other organizations that are in emerging technologies as an organization that they're able to donate into to be able to also achieve their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals.
Yeah, well, and I, it's clear how this was really aligned for you. I guess what would your advice be to someone if they're, just thinking about new fundraising events or new things that they could do and curious about, is a virtual reality space, like, is that right for our organization? Should we be making that investment? What do you think are the right questions for people to be asking?
Well, I think come to the reality that this is going to be the future. And the pandemic really did show that. And while there is that move back to in-person, when we talk about the virtual events that we're doing, whether it be over Zoom or GatherTown, whatever might be the platform, a customized like virtual immersive space really does give that sense of gathering. And so there's a lot of value in doing that. And then the other thing is you are able to then present your achievements in very different ways. as well. And so whether that be creating galleries or also being able to put in live streaming videos, it doesn't feel like you're far apart. So it does open up the opportunity, not just for giving in your regional area, but like we're getting donations from across our country. We're able to now reach out even further into into the States as well, as an opportunity to like give into this organization, because you feel connected, you can feel a part of it. It's not something that's far away. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in virtual spaces, and it's better to dip your feet in now, and be a part of what the evolution of these spaces can be in the future.
Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, for you all, it also sounds like just the visuals of what you do are part of what makes the virtual room really compelling. So I think that sounds like, that's a part of your mission in your organization, then it could make a lot of sense as well. And last question is just general advice, especially now that you're 2 years into your nonprofit journey. What would your number one piece of fundraising event advice be to others on the call?
Oh my goodness. Be very clear on who the event is for. I would say, and keep it simple and keep it direct. So what has been great, again, with being a youth-centered organization, is that we do a lot of events that really is about drawing in young people. But what has actually been really great is that parents are dropping off their young person, or telling their young person about it, and then they're finding themselves having their own night off or their own time alone that actually has created this really great community of adults and parents and potential donors and fundraisers, and funders for us. So keep it simple and be very clear on who your audience for, because you never know.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Antonia, so much for sharing with us. Everyone, we're going to drop the link to just give us a little feedback and your thoughts about your takeaways from Antonia. And again, if you want to see that VR in action, we will have demos tomorrow and Thursday of all the products today. So it's really, these visual things are really cool to see live. But thank you, Antonia, for sharing. We will just take a minute here for everyone to fill that out and come back and wrap up. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining and everyone who presented and shared. Just a reminder that we have 2 more sessions still in part of our Camp Impact series. So next week is all about storytelling in your marketing, and the following week is all about grant writing, where we'll be doing workshops and showcases of success stories and lots of great insight for people to take into your work. You can check out demos of all these products later this week on Wednesday and Thursday, and sign up for those Camp Impact sessions on August 30th and September 7th. Thank you so much for joining. Please, if you didn't have a chance to fill out those feedback forms and let us know what you thought about the products and speakers today and what you're going to take into your own practice. And just appreciate everyone joining, and all the sharing in the chat was wonderful too. So everybody enjoy, have a great week, and we'll see you at some of these demos later this week. Bye, everybody.